Jordan, what just happened?
What are you talking about? I was asleep.
We had it. We had everything. We had it all. It was a flawless campaign. We had
Perfect.
could not have been any better. We had Queen Latifah. We had the Swifties. We had the Bayhive. Eminem. All the celebs were on board. We had, most importantly, Liz Cheney. We had so much Liz Cheney. I don't understand how this happened. I was really feeling good about this. And my entire belief system's been shaken here.
It's troubling. We're going to roll up our sleeves. I still believe in the promise of America. Even if America repeatedly tells me it does not believe in the promise of America.
I still believe in the promise of being a high-powered Democratic Party consultant because, after they spend $1 billion on this campaign, only to publicly and humiliatingly fail miserably, all of the people that were involved in making these decisions are all going to still go on to have great jobs doing the exact same thing and offering people the exact same advice moving forward. It's great work if you can get it,
I mean, think about the people who ran Hillary's campaign. The type of campaign they ran, the style, the strategy, the approach. In the immediate aftermath of 2016, I thought there was some mea culpas. Oh, we shouldn't have done that. We shouldn't have done this. And I thought they learned. Because you did see Biden run a different style of campaign in 2020. Now, we'll get into the substance in a minute. I think still, if COVID didn't happen, Trump would have won in 2020. But nevertheless, in that moment, it was an economic heavy message. And they reverted back to, hey, look at our Republican friends. We're going to put them in the cabinet. And of course, now Trump won. You saw depressed turnout. The shifts that people were pointing out, all of these rightward shifts, weren't really increases in Trump votes. It was Democrats not showing up. It was Harris underperforming Harris underperforming Biden relative to 2020.
And Clinton.
And yeah, I mean, we'll see. It's going to take a few days for the California votes to be counted. She might end up taking the popular vote, but it's not looking good. It is a humiliating defeat. And there are so many parallels to 2016. These same people learned absolutely nothing, tried to do a very similar style campaign, and yet again handed the White House to Trump.
Yeah, I think before we start getting into the nitty-gritty of that, I'm just wondering kind of how your night went observing these results come in. Because I don't know, I think I've been pretty publicly proved wrong on a lot of predictions that I've made about U.S. politics over the years. I think we were pretty cynical about this for the last couple of weeks. Like we were saying a couple of weeks ago, as soon as this obsession with Liz Cheney and all these repeated campaign events with Liz Cheney started happening, that was the moment where I really started thinking, oh, they're going to lose. I don't think either of us were fooled by this kind of mirage in the closing days of this election. Oh, she's ahead in Iowa. And
no.
We were talking about some of the electoral maps, putting her at, over 300 electoral votes and all this kind of stuff. I don't think either of us were fooled by that. I do think maybe I should have stuck to my guns a little bit more. I think I got a little bit more optimistic that they were going to be able to pull it out over the last couple of days, but was still very skeptical and did think that a Trump victory was really likely. But I was quite surprised by the decisiveness of it. I was not expecting a race that was going to be called last night, probably something that was going to be tied up in the courts for a while. It was genuinely quite shocking. But yeah, given the parallels that we talked about, even in the last episode, the parallels to 2016, which I think we were both recognizing, I guess it shouldn't be all that surprising. but I was wondering what your reaction was as the night moved on.
Yeah. So yeah, we talked on Monday, did this show. I yeah, like we talked about, did not buy into this Iowa poll at all. That was just, to me, totally bogus, an outlier. Look, I'm sure maybe she messed up. Maybe she just somehow got a weird sample of voters. That did not make sense to me. That one single outlier poll leading people to think that Harris was going to run the table. No way. So I let me go back, and then I'll get back to that moment. Past couple weeks, as I've talked about on here, I have been to Nevada twice and Arizona twice. And I talked to people. I remember when I got back from one of those trips, I remember talking to you about how startling it was. Not what did not leave feeling great about Harris's chances. And seeing the ads, especially, and I have a new video up with The Intercept right now breaking down one of the ads that I saw almost every commercial break, pointing out or highlighting that clip of Harris on The View saying she wouldn't do anything different than Biden. So already an unpopular candidate, not doing it. And they are blasting that ad in swing states almost every commercial break. Boom, boom, boom. Economic policy, you don't like it. Your economic situation sucks. Harris is more of the same. Boom, every ad break. Did not feel good about it. I think some of the early voting numbers and the participation rates by demographics were slightly encouraging. And when I did my electoral college map, just kind of as a soft prediction, the most I had her up by was 3 electoral college votes. That's it. That said, I go into election day. It just does not feel like she's going to do it. And I told my fiance, I was telling my friends, I was telling my coworkers, he's going to win. He will win. 7:30, 30 minutes after the first major set of polls close, we're starting to get numbers in. I text my coworkers, he's winning. Trump is winning. And they're like, what makes you say that? Why would you say that so early? The Florida numbers? It's just like, there's just no way she's going to win. So my whole night last night was, when is he winning this? And sure enough, he won.
It's interesting to think about, from covering this entire sort of campaign on this show, how there was this moment when Biden stepped aside, which, that's something that we had been kind of talking about for a while, just based on his own obvious cognitive issues, which were present in 2020 and had gotten significantly worse, and which were on full display in that debate. And not only was that obviously going to be a big problem, but had these really kind of anemic numbers based primarily around these economic issues, primarily because of inflation. And it's another thing we had talked about over and over, this insistence that some people connected to the administration, some people maybe on the outside looking in, but taking this strategy of kind of just hand waving away the general everyday experience of so many people saying, like, my life is more difficult now. I go to the grocery store, every single thing is more expensive. Even if I'm making slightly more money than I was a few years ago, I have less spending power because when I go to the store to purchase products that I need to live, they're more expensive. And it seemed like there was this insistence from people to be like, no, you're wrong. You're wrong to think that. Look at this chart. Look at this graph. Look at these numbers that I've got here will prove that that's actually just some kind of like niche online leftist thing. And it's not a reflection of reality. And there's just this refusal to accept that this was a problem for people. And yeah, so like you said, there's this moment when Kamala takes over. They bring in Tim Walz, which was, I think, a really good pick precisely because he's really good at speaking about these exact issues. Not only is he good at speaking about them, but in Minnesota, Democrats were able to use the political power they had to pass a lot of like really important legislation that helped people. So it's like, okay, this seems like an encouraging sign. They're bringing in someone that's really capable of not only articulating this message, but showing like with his track record that it's possible to implement these kind of policies to help people. And for this little moment, like, I don't know if it was like a week, there was actually, it seemed like there's some genuine excitement and momentum to move away from Biden, to do something different. And then something broke along the way. This is when I think the consultants get involved. Um, and they completely move away from this kind of messaging. It's like we didn't hear from Tim Walz for weeks, it felt like. Or when we did hear from him, he's talking more about why we need to be more combative against Iran than talking about these kinds of economic issues. You had that interview that you talked about on The View where Kamala Harris can't name one thing that she's going to do differently from Joe Biden, which is exactly what people obviously wanted. And these election results clearly prove that. So it's just, there was this brief opportunity here, and I'm just kind of sitting here now in the day after this election, just marveling at how this was completely squandered. And there's a lot of things we can point to. We can continue talking about, different factors that led to this. There's the foreign policy and Gaza stuff. There's the economy. There's all kinds of factors. And I think with the result that that's this definitive, there's not any one thing that you can point to. In a way, it's entirely possible that this was just always what the result was going to be. There's a kind of feeling of inevitability around it. But you can't help but feel like whatever opportunity that there was to actually chart a different course on either economic issues or foreign policy issues, they just completely avoided doing that, and steered right back into that exact same kind of like third way neoliberal Clintonist policy, trying to appeal to these moderate conservatives, campaigning with Liz Cheney, appealing to no one, bringing in no new people into this coalition. And whatever opportunity that there was to maybe avoid this outcome was just totally squandered. And now here they are, and they got their asses handed to them.
Yeah. There's one other thing about Kamala replacing Biden that I didn't really see mentioned a lot. I think some people obviously would offer up, but it wasn't as big of an issue that I think it might have actually been. It wasn't as big of an issue in the discourse or in the media than I think it actually was in the electorate. And on one of these trips to Arizona, I was talking to a friend who's lived there for years, has a deep network there, and was asking him, like, what do people think? How are people leaning? And he said he thinks Trump's going to win. People don't seem into it. And I thought, oh, what? Is it Gaza? Is it something else? And he's like, no. They don't feel like they had a voice. They don't feel like they had a say in who the nominee was. And he said that these are liberals. These are people who were going to vote for the Democrat, and they feel like that opportunity was taken from them because there wasn't a primary and they didn't pick Kamala. And I thought, like, oh, that's interesting. And then he and I were talking last night, and I was like, wow, you were right. Like, Arizona did not go. I think there were other factors as well that led to that. I don't think it's the only one, but I don't think people gave that enough attention. There were some calls when Biden stepped down, we should have an open process at the convention. That I still don't know if that would have changed the outcome. It would have definitely been chaotic and messy. I think the takeaway ultimately is one of the biggest reasons we're in this mess and that we didn't have this process is because of Biden's ego. And the Biden administration and campaign staffers who knowingly lied to the entire country about his condition, and the media stenographers who pretended like it was a conspiracy theory until it was impossible to ignore.
Yeah.
Until he had that major fucking gaffe on the debate stage. It went from what happened to cheap fakes? That was a huge
Yeah.
A massive misinformation issue. And then suddenly we no longer hear about it after he drops out. His fucking ego and the cabal of enablers around him are one of the biggest, if not the biggest reason that Trump is now going back to the White House.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a reason Kamala, despite somehow becoming a presidential nominee, didn't ever win a single primary race or a single delegate in any of these races in either 2020.
She didn't even make it.
Or this year.
She didn't make it to the first one. She dropped out before the Iowa caucus.
Yeah, exactly. Because I just don't think she's a very good candidate. She just did not ever come across as someone that's like authentic. She doesn't appear capable of talking in anything but these kind of prepackaged sound bites. Anytime anyone challenges her on anything, whether it's foreign policy, Gaza, or the economy, or whatever else, all she has are these kind of like focus group crafted messages and talking points that she can never really deviate from. Was not really a credible deliverer of any of these kinds of messages, even if they had a real campaign platform, which they didn't really. And like I said, I think these problems were always there, but there was still an opportunity to, look at the things that people had a problem with Biden about and do something different. And, talking about Biden's ego and all this stuff, because that's it. It's like the fact that he finally was forced to step down like 100 days before this election really avoided any kind of like democratic process that could have maybe put someone that was going to be better to be in that position in place, or put pressure on someone to have a different kind of campaign. As a side note too, I wonder how pissed Biden is though, because I'm sure he still believes that he could have beaten Trump and was now forced out and forced to sit on the sidelines while, they took over the campaign and totally blew it. That's kind of an interesting wrinkle to think about as well.
Yeah, well, I wish he was alive to see it.
Yeah, it's too bad. Yeah. Biden's ghost is going to be really PO'd about this. I've really been thinking though about 2016, and now we're getting a second Trump term, which is still hard to wrap my mind around. I don't know if you're quite ready for the shit show, the daily shit show to begin again, but it's happening now. But I've been thinking back to 2016 and the Trump's initial victory, which was so shocking. This one was far less shocking, and all the discourse and dialogue in the days and weeks that followed that. How did this happen? And what did we do wrong? And what do we need to do next? And there was this idea based on the Bernie campaign and the success that had had in mobilizing people in 2015. This kind of camp formed, and I think both of us kind of were part of this camp, saying like, this is how you defeat this kind of like right-wing populism, this kind of like the phony con man Trump version of this right-wing populism, through this very targeted economic message, speaking to people's like material conditions that they're living in, trying to speak to people's needs and having a sort of trustworthy person to be advocating for this message about the things that they're going to do to help people, Americans, when it comes to, healthcare and education and debt relief and all these really important factors. And, 2020 was the test of that strategy. And for a while, as we all remember, it looked like that was a pretty successful way of doing things in the initial primary. This is the early days of this podcast when we were covering the Democratic primary. And this is what the result was when Bernie, because of these policies, became such a threat to this Democratic Party establishment that they conspired behind the scenes to do everything that they could to stop him from winning that nomination, which involved, these other candidates dropping out and getting behind Joe Biden to make sure Joe Biden was the guy. And Biden was able to win, like you said earlier, partially because COVID happened. And, who knows if that would have even been possible without COVID going on, Biden's victory. But I think another reason that he did win, like you talked about, is this different kind of campaign. And then one of the reasons that this different kind of campaign happened was because Bernie took whatever leverage that he could and took a lot of criticism for this, but got behind Biden and tried to do everything he could to take the movement that had formed behind him and redirect it into Biden's case and put pressure on them to adopt these kind of policies. And as we talked about, even though Biden's not a great, I didn't think Biden was a very good candidate, or very good choice for a number of reasons. He did have some genuinely economically populist kind of ideas that he ran on. And Biden, for all his faults, was a somewhat credible deliverer of this kind of message. And I think that's one of the reasons that this campaign was successful. But here we are now, 4 years later, with all the fallout from the fact that he was not able to really take these progressive economic policies that he campaigned on and actually turn it into real policy, partially because his own party, in the form of Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema and whoever else, came together to stop that from happening, which Biden and his administration didn't really seem to care all that much to do anything about. So it leaves the party in this situation where people are really dissatisfied with these economic conditions. And then Kamala Harris comes in, doesn't really do anything to differentiate themselves from it. And this is the inevitable result. But I'm thinking of this kind of squandered opportunity that was there, because this was the whole theory about how to defeat this kind of right-wing populism. And it's just, as much as I personally have gotten wrong over the years, is that I've been trying to talk about these issues and engage in this kind of like analysis or commentary or whatever it is. One thing that I felt very certain about in 2019 and 2020 was that, like, if somehow Joe Biden were able to, through some miracle, win that nomination and even win the presidency, the result, if they did this kind of thing that, you know, Democrats always seem to do, with kind of tack to the center and forget about these kinds of like initiatives, what it's going to lead to is an even worse Trump, or just Trump himself coming back and winning in 2024. And that is exactly what happened. And I don't know if anyone is ready for the fallout of what that's going to look like.
Would think that maybe, and not, I don't expect this, especially within 24 hours, from Democratic consultants or party officials, but maybe from the media or pundits, that maybe after the third time running against Trump, with the only success being the guy who had more of an economic populist message beating him, maybe then they realize, hey, this is something that works no matter which side of the party you are on. That's why people are going to where they are. People feel more, I think, more excited when it's on the left, because it's not wrapped up in anti-immigrant, anti-trans, anti-insert marginalized community rhetoric like it is on the right. A lot of these attacks and a lot of this messaging is, you can't get a home because of immigrants. You can't get a job. This is an old one, but he has certainly leaned on it. You can't get a job. You're struggling because of immigrants. Immigrants are causing crime. Your safety's at risk, right? Bernie was popular across the political spectrum. Biden beat Trump. Those are the two success stories for the Democratic Party at the national level. What are they doing today? What's their diagnosis? Nope. Got to tack more to the right. The era of the progressive movement has to end. What is that? Yeah. What is the progressive era? When was that? Was it just Biden the only time a Democrat beat Trump?
Yeah.
And just singling out different causes, different groups. Joe and Mika on Morning Joe blamed pronouns. Nobody is running on this. Nobody at the national level on the Democratic Party, or nobody at the federal level in the Democratic Party, is running a pronoun campaign. You are scapegoating people who have, as we've seen time and time again, next to zero, if not zero, political power, because you can't accept the fact that your entire life, your worldview is fucking wrong. You're only in that position because you will not challenge authority and political power. You will only parrot what they say. So for you to question that would question your own livelihood. So it's much easier for them to turn around and say, it's trans people. We need to stop with the identity issues. We need to stop with the progressive movement. What progressive policies were in this? Do you want to consider legalizing marijuana in the last 48 hours as a Hail Mary? No, the base didn't even fucking show up. There was no progressive representation here. What are you talking about? The most excited they were was when Walls, for a week and a half, kind of talked like a progressive. They made him shut up, and energy fucking plummeted.
Yeah, I saw the comments from Richie Torres to this effect. And by the way, before I say anything, also it's just I should point out that like this is exactly one of the reasons we get into this sometimes. Why do you, Rob? Why do you care about this? You don't live here. You know, why does it matter to you? And the thing is, this is happening everywhere. There's a global far right movement that is happening right now. These economic conditions, they begin in America and they're emanating out to the rest of the world. And this exact kind of like conservative, reactionary, right wing movement is coming from America and it's infecting everywhere else. Because Canada is heading down the exact same path right now. We're headed right towards a massive conservative majority the next time we do have an election. And this is exactly why I was not only invested in this Bernie movement, because it's giving a indication of what needs to happen, what kind of a political movement can actually combat this, but also the UK and Corbynism in the UK, which for a short, brief, beautiful period looked like it might have some kind of success there before it was also ruthlessly crushed as well by the establishment there. So this is why I like to talk about this stuff, and this is why I like to think about it. And this is a really troubling sign about the advance of this right-wing movement around the world. The fact that Trump is coming back for another 4 years, it is a really ugly sign of like where everything is going around the world. You know, America is the epicenter. It's the hegemon. This is where it's festering the most, but this is having huge impact in Canada and everywhere around the world. I just wanted to mention that because this is one thing that I was really thinking about. I was watching these results come in last night and reflecting on the last, 6-8 years that I've been spending talking about this stuff. Just thoughts I was having as a result of that. So number one, I just wanted to get that out of the way. But yeah, I saw the comments you were talking about when like Richie Torres, who the Democrats really brilliantly parachuted into Michigan in the last couple of weeks to do to campaign in these communities where they absolutely got fucking hammered and with good cause. In communities, where Rashida Tlaib was easily reelected for all this stuff of like, oh, this is some kind of misogyny thing. It's misogyny. That's the reason that Kamala Harris is losing. It's like, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar easily reelected because they actually have these values that speak to what the needs of these communities are. Whereas the Democrats, they send in Richie Torres and Bill Clinton to tell these people to go fuck themselves. People that are genuinely concerned about the fact that their literal family members are being blown apart by U.S. supplied bombs, which Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have been fully supporting sending to Israel, no matter what crimes they commit. And obviously, as we know, that's not the only reason that this election result happened, but I think it's a significant factor in Michigan and in just generally demobilizing progressive people, especially young people around the country. It's a major factor, even if it's not the only factor. But yeah, I saw him making this case. We got to move past these. We went too far to the left. We've got to move past these progressive issues. And I thought it was just really interesting as well, because as he's talking about, defund the police and these anti-police activists and these pro-Palestine activists, and we need to move away from these left-wing issues and start focusing on the working class and what they want. And it's like, what the fuck does this guy think left-wing values actually are? Like, if you have these left-wing values, you of course want to incorporate things like police reform or, a maybe slightly less genocidal foreign policy. Those should be encompassed in left-wing values too, or protecting, trans people or other LGBTQ people, clearly. But like appealing to these working class people through economic policies, those are left-wing values. Those should be progressive values. That's exactly what Bernie Sanders was doing without throwing immigrants and other marginalized people onto the bus, without completely abandoning them, building a coalition that includes immigrants, that includes LGBTQ people, that includes racialized people, that includes all these communities, that's centered around this strong economic message that can appeal to working class people that have been getting screwed over for their entire lives, or at least the last 30 plus years, by these kinds of policies. That's exactly what that campaign was, and that's what the Democratic Party establishment came together to ensure would never have this real seat at the table. So I'm just genuinely confused. I echo your confusion about what some of these people think constitutes progressive policies. And when they say we need to focus on the working class, if they could explain why, when a campaign came along that was designed to do exactly that, they all came together to circle around Joe fucking Biden and ensure that this would never have the opportunity to take hold, crushing the hopes and aspirations of millions of young people that actually felt hope for the first time in many years that they might actually be able to accomplish something meaningful. So yeah, I'm wondering like what these actual progressive policies that these folks are talking about, what they actually think they are.
Yeah. Which party do you think you're in, Richie? This is traditionally what the Democratic Party has purported to be. And largely during the Clinton era, you shifted away from it, which is why people were so intrigued across the aisle by someone like Sanders in 2016 and largely in 2020. And the coalition that he built, like you point out, saw a large shift go to Trump. And it's not just Latinos. Latinos shifted to Trump, but also young people. The exit polling showed, especially in Michigan, young people were shifting to Trump. And some people tried to chalk that up to the like Manosphere podcast appearances. That is not the case. It might be a small part of it, but that is not the only reason. People there, especially in the Rust Belt, understand the Democrats' recent history, young people especially. And even if you were a young kid and can remember the economic fallout of 2008, starting then until now, you have known the Democratic Party to be one that will not look out for workers, especially in times of economic despair. That was heightened during COVID. There were some things that helped, of course. A lot of those benefits expired, and the Biden administration did not fight hard enough to extend them. So you saw Obama bail out the banks, bail out Wall Street. Working people got next to nothing. People lost their homes, lost their life savings. Maybe a relative that you know, and I have people like this, lost what little savings they had or what little retirement they had and couldn't retire. And they just worked until they died. That is your understanding of the Democratic Party. So when you have somebody like Sanders coming in and talking about how they want to change the system, totally transform the party, put people and working people first, that's refreshing. And that's why you saw such a diverse coalition. When they continue to mention policing, what were you paying attention to the past several months? You nominated a cop who repeatedly brought up her experience as a prosecutor and as an attorney general who took on the cartels and transnational gangs. We heard this endlessly. Biden increased police funding. Nobody on that ticket, nobody in that administration supported anything that would in any way reallocate funds away from police departments and toward other community services, which is ultimately what defund the police is. Nobody was saying that. Where are you getting this? The idea that we somehow were too far to the left when she ran to Biden's right. Like, what are you talking about? She ran to Biden's right and lost. She wanted a lower capital gains tax than Biden. What are you, lower corporate tax rate than Biden? What are you fucking talking about?
Yeah, I mean, just in and of itself, also just this idea that it's some like extreme radical position that turns off John and Jane Q voter. The fact that like it's a problem that American police have this perpetual right to just assassinate citizens in the street. with very little consequence. I think that's probably something that should be talked about. And like this exact thing that you talked about when it comes to defunding the police and advocating, to put more of these resources into communities and uh, different forms of spending that can avoid this exact thing from happening. I mean, yeah, this is something that they should be talking about. It's not this radical position. Um, but I also want to I think it's important to talk about this idea of inflation too in the economy, and the way that there's the idea of what inflation is and what causes it is just allowed to be explained to people and goes completely unchallenged. And I think there's a lot of people that look at that social spending that took place at the beginning of COVID, which saved people's lives, that bailed people out, that was genuinely transformative for a lot of people. And a lot of this spending began under Trump as well, even though it went away under Biden. But there's this narrative that took place that's the reason that inflation happened. That's what caused the kind of post-COVID inflationary situation. And people talk about the economy and inflation as if it's some kind of scientific principle. Like when you spend social spending on helping people get groceries, helping people with unemployment, child tax credits, well, it just causes the cost of prices of products. It just causes the prices of products to just rise magically. It's this scientific principle. And this is how people are allowed to kind of frame these issues in the economy. And I think a lot of people believe this. And just it's this understanding that oh, you can never spend anything like that. Of course, when you allocate resources to to the military industrial complex, sending billions of dollars to Israel, Ukraine, wherever else, that doesn't cause inflation. When you do anything to actually raise people's wages or put money in people's pockets, that just magically causes inflation. And the whole human element gets completely lost. The fact that there's human beings in this process making the decision to raise their prices to soak up however much of this extra money, extra cash they see floating around, that gets completely lost. And the fact that the Biden administration never really did anything to really address that. It's price gouging. When grocery barons collude to raise the prices of all their products, that's not some magic scientific principle that's happening. That's a legitimate thing that human beings are doing. These corporations and massively powerful interests are coming together to try and earn record profits, which they did. And that was never really called out to any kind of to the extent that it needed to be. And they never really take any kind of forceful approach to speak to this, to either educate people on this and communicate this to people, or to talk to the price gougers and corporate villains that are engaging in this practice and force them to not do that. You might have some tough talk every now and then, but this was never something that was ever really seemed to be part of their agenda. And that's ultimately, I think, is what is probably the largest factor of what has just happened. The fact that this inflation really hurt people economically, and they blamed that on the party that was in power, whether that's fair or not. But for what they could have done about inflation, or at least is educating people on this, communicating this to people, or actually enacting some kind of consequences to the people that were engaging in this kind of price gouging, they just didn't do it. And that really cost them, I feel.
It hasn't been as prominent of an argument recently, but I am starting to see it reemerge as people try to point the fingers over the results. But on inflation, you may recall, especially last year and into this year to an extent, Democrats tried to blame people's frustration with the economy, but ultimately their own material conditions, on TikTok. They said people were being lied to and they were seeing propaganda and they thought things were more expensive. And I even saw it today. Someone said, there was something about the results, and someone quote tweeted, well, one person paid $8 for eggs, so now we have to have Trump for 4 more years. Do you shop for yourself? Because apparently you don't. I see it. Other people obviously see it. The idea, and there's a piece in the Washington Post, and there was a really good quote from somebody in there. This is from last November. There's this cadre of number crunching paperwork obsessives who are convinced that if some report says inflation is slowing, that means everything is great, and everybody who feels something different is either lying or brainwashed by TikTok. The idea that people are just making this up or are misled about their own material conditions is absurd. And that quote was me, motherfucker, me in November 2023. I'm spiking the football because I saw this was bull then. And now look, you get Trump for another 4 years because you couldn't accept the fact that people were upset. You couldn't counter it. You couldn't run on it. And Trump exploited it. And now he won. Good job.
And, this obsession with TikTok as well, it goes into the foreign policy stuff. I saw Hillary Clinton was on TV the last couple of weeks. This is trying to explain away these student encampments. The fact that like there's students, and it's not just TikTok, but on any social media, are opening their phones for the last year and seeing the nonstop stream of horrific violence fully subsidized by the United States government, with the Biden administration and Kamala Harris deeply involved in that as well. And just taking the position, this is wrong. I'm against this. I don't want our government to be doing this. It's disgusting. It's immoral. We need to stop this. And engaging in activism, going on marches, engaging in these encampments. And rather than wrestle with that in any way, you just had these like fucking war criminals in the upper echelons of the United States government being like, this is just the Chinese TikTok algorithm convincing people that this horrific genocide and the mass murder of little children and burning people alive in hospital beds, convincing them somehow that this is wrong. And, these student encampments, they're not this organic expression of this kind of disgust, but it's all these Iranian funded encampments, and they're using these Iranian approved talking points. It's just this complete unwillingness to grapple with the results of their own policies, whether you're talking about the economy or foreign policy. And they've got every excuse for like why people are becoming radicalized against this. But nothing will ever seem to cause them to actually question their own complicity in it and questioning, how these things have come about in the first place. And I mean, I think this is one interesting thing about this result, which none of us were really expecting, the kind of decisiveness of this Trump victory, is it has to an extent forced that, like, they can't blame Jill Stein voters. They can't blame the third party. They can't, like, we were all thinking, oh, what are they going to blame? Russian disinformation. They're going to blame Iranian disinformation or, Jill Stein voters or whatever else. They can't really do that. They take away every single Jill Stein vote and put it in, Kamala's camp in any of these swing states, and she still loses. So there's no real excuse. But that's the truly incredible thing, is despite that, they're still doing every single thing that they can to avoid, pointing to their own complicity in creating this exact result. So it's going to be interesting seeing as the weeks go on to see whether there's any kind of actual reflection on this. To go back to Bernie's, campaign, he put out quite a scathing statement today. He seems pretty pissed off about this result and the fact that they've completely abandoned these economic policies that he bent over backwards to try and hand to them. I understand there's a lot of cynicism about Bernie now. Some of it is deserved. Some of it, I think, is over the line. But the fact that he did try to, make peace with the Democratic Party establishment, who were so clearly, had a knife still sticking 6 inches out of his back. And now he's kind of pissed off that these people have completely blown it. But he seems, determined to try and ensure that this kind of isn't repeated, or that there is some kind of a movement that can try and pressure the people in power to, again, take over this kind of campaign. But, who knows how successful that would be. But I think that's just going to be the interesting thing to see how it develops over the next couple of weeks and months, and whether, because I think Bernie is going to be too old to kind of lead that kind of a movement moving forward. But whether somebody is going to be able to come along that can actually run a campaign like this, that can combat this kind of like rising right-wing populism, that can actually provide a genuine alternative in this new Trump term, because a lot hinges on whether someone can come along that's going to credibly be able to do that. I'm not totally convinced that there's anyone at the moment that does have that kind of credibility, but it's going to be interesting to see.
On the Gaza thing, well, there's a couple of things we should tease out here. So we talked for a year, and maybe some people got tired of hearing it, but we talked for over a year about how this is going to be an issue for Harris in the election. It's hard because exit polls aren't always accurate and reliable, but you can get some inferences from some of them. If you see trends, you might not get a specific percent, but what we saw was this was something that people were upset about, did not want to participate in or support, like you say. That's why we saw third-party support rise in places like Michigan. And that's ultimately why Trump won Dearborn, because so many people either didn't show up, maybe they voted for him, but many people voted for Stein. I think most people just didn't show up. But that issue nationally at scale led to, in part, not just that issue, but one of many issues that led to the depressed turnout that we saw for Harris. She ran behind Biden. One issue for sure. And people immediately tried to, point fingers or shift blame or make excuses for why that was. And you saw similar arguments after 2016 when people just declared the entire Rust Belt, this blue wall, all of it that went for Trump in 2016, well, they're all racist and sexist and xenophobic. Well, those same people, those same states, with the exception of Ohio, voted for Biden in 2020. Did they take a cycle off from being racist and sexist and xenophobic? Or maybe, just maybe, do they have issues that affect them directly or affect their communities directly or affect the global community that they are passionate about? And it's insulting when these things are ignored or dismissed, or the Democratic Party doubles down on them like they did with Gaza. But the deployment of these arguments, these defenses, these deflections are always very entertaining for me, even if they do make me go insane. So last night, someone tweeted, looks like Kamala Harris will not win the south end of Dearborn, an area 90+% Muslim that Biden won with 88% of the vote 4 years ago. And a white female comedian replied, as far as I can tell, based on all of her other posts, maybe not. You know what? Let's just give her the benefit. Maybe if I'm wrong, I won't. So I won't name her. But replied, pure sexism here. Dearborn, Michigan, you have been called out. Yeah. You need to do better. Work on your sexism problem, Dearborn.
I just, in general, some of the responses to, Arab communities that either didn't voted for Jill Stein, or like I said, many voted for Trump. And, we could debate whether we think that's wrongheaded. I certainly don't think Trump is a credible, peaceful candidate. I don't think he's going to bring peace to the Middle East or anywhere else. I have always think that was a complete mirage. But nevertheless, the Democrats set themselves up by fully arming and funding Netanyahu for the last year. On that note, also, Netanyahu's thrilled, congratulating Trump. Israel is thrilled that Trump's coming back, making it all the more fucking insane and stupid. Not only was it morally abhorrent that they supported Netanyahu fully for the last year, but he's openly campaigning for their opponent. They still gave him everything that they want. So it's stupid politically, in addition to being disgusting and genocidal. But then seeing the response from these liberals, like in this house, we believe that all Black lives matter and immigrants are welcome and all this stuff, being like, I hope you get deported. I hope Trump turns Gaza into nukes Gaza. Enjoy the mass deportations. Like, it's just fucking insane. Again, and we're talking about people that just will not take one moment to reconcile how they have created this exact situation, their own policies that the Democratic Party establishment they worship have done to create it. Just blaming Arab people and Latinos who have made this move towards Trump in and of itself is ridiculous, considering it is still a predominantly white country and it's predominantly white people that are driving this movement, and white women as well were an essential part of this Trump coalition, who seem to escape this kind of criticism. This was always why I was a little concerned when there was this talk about, oh, women are voting in record numbers, early voting. This idea that this was all entirely motivated by reproductive rights, and all of these votes were going to Kamala Harris. I was always a little skeptical about that, considering the ways that white women, especially, have been a big part of this Trump coalition, and they showed up in huge numbers to support Trump last night as well. But yeah, just everything about that entire reaction, though, has been completely disgusting. And yeah, blaming it on sexism just on that level is also completely ridiculous, considering the ways that women were such a big part of this result.
It's absolutely pathetic all around. And also, Harris loses Wisconsin and Michigan. Disappointing. Pathetic. Tlaib, of course, unsurprisingly, wins her district. Omar wins hers. Safe. Both of them are in safe seats, but you saw, especially in Tlaib's district, voters break off when it came to Harris. But also, there were 2 Senate races. And for this to be pure sexism on display in Michigan, there were 2 Senate races, one in Wisconsin and one in Michigan. Of course, Harris loses both of those, but Alyssa Slotkin wins her Senate race in Michigan. Tammy Baldwin wins hers in Wisconsin. So they just straight up did not vote for Harris. And again, these are traditionally like working class, blue collar states, the blue wall. You have major manufacturing and union blocks there, and you can't win. Like, economic messaging works there. Populist, progressive economic messaging works there. And again, you just blow it. They just aren't voting for you. The Senate races go your way, but the presidential does not. Like, what does that tell you?
Yeah, and there's a couple of other points that I wanted to hit on as well. Just the fact that this kind of like this tacking to the right on military stuff, the most lethal military force, on law and order, and trying to get to conservatives right on this. I think like American liberals need to like wrap their minds around the fact that, like, to most people in the country, especially the kind of moderate conservatives that they're trying to reach with this messaging, they don't think that they're credible vehicles for this message. They don't, no matter what kind of rhetoric they use about the military or law and order, they're not going to believe it. So they got to start thinking about a different strategy rather than just trying to sound like war hawks and cop worshippers, because people don't believe it. Even the people that they're trying to reach don't believe it. Another factor as well, like while we're still talking about this, is the huge amount of crypto money that flooded in to some of these races. I saw the Sherrod Brown race. I think he had something like $44 billion in, oh, sorry. Sorry. Excuse me.
Extra few zeros there.
Yeah. Well, that's the crypto industry. They're just making shit up as they go along. It's not real money, but $44 million of negative attack ads getting flooded into his race, which is just an absolutely insane fact. And it's just a total affront to whatever passes for American democracy, the fact that this is allowed. But yet this is another case, though, where people in the Democratic Party have been flirting with this industry for a while. They've not done anything to rein in this completely out of control scam that is like now wielding so much power. And they've tried to like work with this industry. I know Kamala was making outreach to the crypto industry, like even in the final weeks of this campaign. That's another thing that they've failed to do anything about. And now you have these crypto billionaires just tossing around this huge amounts of money into these races to just shape the U.S. government to however they want. It's like completely outrageous. And, it's the crypto world people, the tech people. I mean, this is the kind of the scariest thing I think about this new Trump term. It's not just about Trump, who is kind of like the figurehead of this movement, but it's the triumvirate for me of Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, along with their man JD Vance in the vice president's office. These people are going to have huge amounts of power in this administration and in the United States government moving forward, where they're going to control all 3 branches of the government. And that is, I think, probably the scariest thing about all this. The fact that this like tech beast that has been kind of like completely growing, totally unrestrained over the last decade plus, with full support of the Democratic establishment a lot of the time, now they've taken full hold of this like reactionary movement. And it's going to have some really, I think, terrifying possible consequences for not just America, but the rest of the world. That's one of the things that I think people should most be alarmed by.
Unfortunately, that is what we are going to be talking about the next 4 years.
I'm not ready. I'm not ready for it to crank back up again. It's hard to believe.
It's a good place to leave it, but yeah, that's what the show will look like for the next 4 years. So if you want the latest on the apocalypse and the crypto fascist right wing takeover of the United States, be sure to subscribe at insurgentspod.com.
Yeah.
You can help keep the show going because Trump's going to be revoking some broadcast licenses from his enemies. And you're going to have to turn to alternative media, and we have you covered.
Yes. This is how we win. This is how we build this coalition to survive the coming right-wing reactionary movement in Canada and the United States, Britain, wherever you happen to be listening. It's by building these kind of institutions, but specifically supporting this podcast. So thank you, folks.
Yeah.